Hello everyone and welcome back to Tokyo on Fire. Today is January 28, 2016. This is episode 42. The Economist group just released a report on democracy throughout the world. I'm joined by co-host Dr. Nancy Snow and Michael Chuchek. Dr. Snow, Japan has fallen a couple of steps and is now characterized as a flawed democracy. How about that?
Yeah, well, it was interesting. This report was released January 21st, and that happened to have been the same day that Ric O'Barry, an activist against the dolphin hunting in Japan, was officially, where papers were drawn up to have him deported from Japan. And I couldn't help but note the irony, because he arrived on Monday, January 18th, and he was trying to enter the country. And the Japanese government has sort of had enough of his activism.
He's the fellow that produced The Cove.
He was the star of The Cove. He was the trainer of Flipper. He's a very well-recognized global activist. There's no question why he was coming back to Japan. I think that the government had sort of reached its level of sort of intolerance of having him become a voice of opposition against Taiji and what goes on there. So the report, though, from The Economist gets released the same day that the deportation announcement occurs. It got me thinking about that same week, another flawed democracy, because indeed there were 4 that went downhill, one being France, Costa Rica, South Korea, and Japan. So it's not just singling out Japan. And it wasn't a huge drop, by the way. But nevertheless, you do have to put this in a larger context. In the same week of Ric O'Barry arriving here and trying to get the global media attention, being somewhat ignored by the Japanese media, you have a figure not at the level of Ric O'Barry, but Pamela Anderson, a celebrity in the U.S. who's a big animal rights activist, who at the invitation of a minister in the French National Assembly speaks that same week that Ric O'Barry tries to get into Japan, and she speaks out against the force feeding of the ducks and geese to make the national delicacy foie gras.
Right.
Here's my point. She made her voice known. She left, returned to her adopted country of the U.S. She's originally Canadian. So the problem with Japan, the reason why The Economist demoted Japan has a lot to do with media censorship, the state secrets law enactment, some of the intimidation from the Japanese government to control advertising and media, to get people to sort of to give writers and reporters kind of a chill pill about what they're going to cover. So the longer that Ric O'Barry stays in this limbo, this legal limbo, because he's being held still outside of the Narita airport, and he probably will have to go at some point. But the longer he stays there, the more sort of global sympathy rises in his favor, no matter what you feel about the dolphin hunting. That's not the point as much I'm trying to make as the democratic process. We're going to talk today about Abe, this being the year of Japan and Abe really going global and assuming global leadership at the UN with the G7 meeting. So much going on. They've made policy speeches saying we're going to take it up the next level. You have this trying to be a global leader, but at the same time, this sense that, well, the full story isn't really being told here because there are certain things that the government's sensitive about. And Ric O'Barry is going to exploit that. So in my op-ed in the Japan Times this week, I said, why not just let him air his views, hold a debate? You know, Fukuzawa Yukichi, who founded Keio University, had a debating society. The old building is still there on campus. He promoted public presentation of ideas. And so in the spirit of internationalizing the university, let's take an international issue like dolphin hunting, give him his say, and then ask him to politely leave. He won't have the same...
Excuse me, what is he being refused for? What is the legal basis? He hasn't broken any Japanese laws, has he?
No, the only thing that I've heard is that he misrepresented the purpose of his visit.
Oh,
he said he wanted to see
tourism?
dolphins. Right. Huh?
So that's the whole thing? That he when he was asked by the immigration officer,
about his reasons
his
for being
intentions
here.
for being here.
Yeah, and so I mean, I made the joke. He's not trying to go take the ride.
How do they know he lied? What
I'm going by
did they take a scan of his brain? And the truth is something quite different.
Oh, you're right. We didn't see where he went. I mean, we didn't see him rent a car and see. He may have taken off to Yokohama.
But he was never allowed. He's not been allowed into the country. So
that's right.
And he's persona non grata for.
Well,
for
and
what?
now he's ratcheted it up and said he's a political prisoner. See, he just did an interview, I think, with one of the wire services over the phone. And this then goes global. Mm-hmm. So the longer that the government really doesn't explain it's like I often say, information abhors a vacuum. When you don't give us enough information, we're going to play it up and turn it into a conspiracy theory. And he's going to just ride this wave out, no pun intended. Right. But I mean, he is a 76-year-old fellow and the Flipper-trainer. I mean, you can't get more sort of touchy-feely, Ric O'Barry.
Had it not been for your article, I wouldn't have known that he was visiting Japan again, because it's not really time for the dolphin hunt in Taji at this point.
That's right.
But for internationally renowned documentary artist like him to come to Japan, I mean, people do that all the time. Why now is this kind of being wrapped up and closed by the Japanese government? I don't understand it.
Well, they're certainly not managing it in a very smart way. But then again, this is where the vertical division between the ministries comes into play. So it's the Ministry of Justice having to handle immigration matters, and it has its procedures, and they are rather primitive, to put it mildly, and very brutal. And whatever the Kante and the media people in the Prime Minister's residence might want to do to manage this in a better way, they can't handle the folks who are across the street, because that's their bailiwick and they're going to defend it. So even if someone has read your op-ed and someone says, yes, exactly, the most that they can do is take your op-ed to the Ministry of Justice, to whomever it is as a decision maker there, and say, look, see, it's not working. Figure out something.
Right. I think he's detested here in Japan for exposing, dolphin hunting and the tradition that's going on.
And also for hypocrisy in that these foreigners, they eat meat,
right?
So they kill animals. Right. What's the difference?
Yes.
That whole narrative.
Save the cows.
That's right. That's right. Only Indian Hindus can be moral in this issue.
But you saw The Cove, right?
I have never seen it.
Okay.
He's a big star in it.
Yeah, it's a pretty good movie, and it's cool, and it shows how he's actually being harassed and chased by villagers. We don't want you around here. Don't film this. We know that you've been here before and you had this movie. So he goes to visit, that area every time he comes here. And, I mean, let's be honest, the Japanese government can admit or reject anybody coming in to visit the country.
But there must be international treaties that cover the movement of people across borders. And unless you have a demonstrable reason, you can't just say, we don't like you.
I think you can.
Oh, really? I thought they could.
I think it is a privilege. It is not a right, just because you
That's what I said
the
in
doors,
my piece.
we try and keep the doors open, and there is a bilateral agreement where you can come in as a tourist. You don't need to have a visa. But, I mean, he's famous.
Yeah, but the thing is, you're saying that he misrepresented himself.
Yeah.
And that's the source of the problem. Well, the only person who could say that he misrepresented himself is himself, saying, I actually didn't mean, when I said that, I was being facetious, I was being mendacious. Okay, well, then I can understand. But if he maintains this lie and says, I'm here merely to look at dolphins, I don't get the deal. But in a broader sense, having to do with media censorship, having to do with control, the issue is, of course, is that this has not appeared at all in Japanese news media of any sort.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I did hear from a professor when I posted this online, And he said, we were talking about this case and we didn't see it covered in the Japanese press, because I was looking at how it went global in the English language media and online. And there's even a petition, and so there's a lot of viral activity around this. And so it's confusing to people because even with the misrepresentation of the visit, everybody knows why he's here. So then what are you afraid of? Because he's been here, I think, 12 or 13 times, I mean, multiple times, in order to even shoot the documentary film. And I just think there was some point of, okay, that's it, we've had enough. But in that context of Japan getting that sort of image of, oh, democracy, not a full democracy now, it creates a bit of a problem, maybe not
maybe
from the...
even pressure on the Japanese government to lay off. And
Sure.
And certainly it has been pushing down.
Yes.
I mean, very blatantly against the Asahi Shimbun, with even the prime minister condemning it for carrying out what its job is trying to find the truth. Sometimes what you report is not 100% the truth. You try to do your best because otherwise you lose your customers. But sometimes you get things wrong. But the narrative of the government has been, you must publish only things that are true. And guess what? We're the only people who know what's true, so you publish what we say. Or if you do ask questions that we don't like, we don't show up, as has happened to the Foreign Correspondents Club in Japan. Gets no members of the cabinet anymore because they ask questions that are not pre-screened and there's no prep work for it. They ask questions based on what they're interested in, and the government doesn't want you to ask those things.
Well, see, this is what I don't understand, because if Prime Minister Abe wants to welcome in the world leaders and the world media along with it, then let's establish let's kind of prime the wheel of that process now, as opposed to putting in these little kinks. You want people to write good things. So give these reporters here a sense that they are welcomed and they can ask their questions and they don't have to self-censor. I look at Asahi Shimbun and I see it as sort of losing some of its fangs. I mean, the watchdog role of the press, it had a very important role to play. Now it seems like the Japan Times is sort of taken up some of that slack. And that's why I'm glad that they will run my pieces. Because I'm not trying to be condemning and put this in a black-white context. I'm always looking for the gray area and the missed opportunity. And I think that with Japan, it's strong in so many industries, and it needs to just get that story shared with the world, and it shouldn't be so fearful about people asking questions. What's wrong with that? That's the democratic process. And that goes back to Fukuzawa. I mean, I love to use him as my example as opposed to Ben Franklin. I call him the Ben Franklin.
But I had an argument on Twitter with a naturalized Japanese citizen. He was previously a citizen of another country. And his view and his point of view, and it's shared by a lot of people, is that when you give especially foreign journalists or foreign academics such as yourself, of leeway, you always point out the bad things about Japan, and you only say how bad the country is and what's wrong with it. And his statement was, is there any country in the world that is so blessed with so many foreigners telling it how bad it is? And while I disagree with his point of view, I do sympathize with people who might feel that way, who don't seem to appreciate, it is out of this bad news, good news kind of interplay that some semblance of what is the truth comes out. People want to have the truth being what they feel. Sure. And not, the interplay of actually two sides of the story coming out.
Yeah. Right. Well, the only thing worse would be ignoring. How would Japan feel if we just ignored it? Because I come at this from a lot of deep affection and love for Japan. So if I didn't care about the place, I wouldn't have anything to say. But I feel invested in being here. And I don't see my role to be a gadfly or always an iconoclast, but rather, as an educator, I'm responsible to my students to be an example of speaking up. Everything we do when we interact, communication, we also go public in our communication. Abe wouldn't give speeches on policy if he didn't think that didn't matter. And so it shouldn't be a role just for government to make pronouncements, but people should respond to that and have their own voices. So my only example is have a voice. You can be very much full of praise but there are plenty of people who praise and sometimes almost do it with blinders on, and no country is an absolute democracy. So flawed is always relative. You could say there are extreme amounts of flaws in the U.S. too. So I just love this country so much and want to see it do better in global public relations.
Right. But the thing is, in this case, the control of the Abe administration over media affairs is part of the reason why the Economist made this judgment.
That's right.
They
of course.
You know, okay, you see the opportunity of, for example, the G7 summit as a chance for Japan to open up to the world. They see it as a chance to present a particular vision of Japan, and it's going to be that way. And the media here collaborate on that.
Yeah.
We had the stunning example in the case of Amari Akira, the Minister of Economics, whom I hope we're going to discuss in one of these episodes, where the day the article on his scandal, where he supposedly was bribed by a company, and with photographs and audio recording and everything with this, that the day that happened and was talked about in the Diet and debated in the Diet, Abe that evening had a media dinner with the chairman of the Yomiuri Shimbun, the head of the news department of the Nikkei Shimbun, TV, commentators, all had dinner together. Now, the media has to be responsible, has to say, look, this will look very bad. We're going to cancel this particular dinner because it will look like collusion. Well, yes, it looks like collusion because it probably is.
Wow. They didn't cancel. Nobody canceled.
They didn't cancel. It was inside, and the dinner was held the host was the Yomiuri Shimbun.
That's amazing.
You know, it's just something you would not think. But that's the reason why the EIU, the Economist Intelligence Unit, has come to that determination.
Right. Well, the Economist Group is not the only one who's watching Japanese politics. We are too. Stay tuned as we follow this issue.